Rangers of Shadow Deep, a tabletop adventure game by Joseph A. McCullough. For those of you who are familiar with, say, Frostgrave, this game here is created by the same guy who created Frostgrave with similar mechanics. It is designed as a solo tabletop adventure game. And I'm just going to go over and give you all a quick overview of the game itself and ways you can use this game or games like this to incorporate into your solo role playing, whether you're actually playing the Rangers of Shadow Deep game itself or if you're playing some other game system that you prefer. This is a table of contents. It goes over how to create your Ranger. Now, when I say Ranger, don't just think the typical D&D style Ranger. In this game, if you wanted to play, say, like a warrior, a heavily armored warrior with sword and shield, you can do so. If you wanted to play a spellcaster, kind of on the druid side, you can do that as well. Don't let the term ranger fool you into thinking you only have to play a ranger. Again, the limit is solely your imagination. Like I said, if you want to play that heavy armored warrior with a big sword and shield or a spellcaster, you can do it in this game. One of the first things you will need are some miniatures. Now, your miniature line can go as fancy and as expensive as you wish to go. You can do something simple with paper counters, standees, or add to your miniatures collection. If you are a role-playing gamer anyway, you probably have some miniatures, especially if you're in the D&D, especially third edition and beyond, as they had a tendency to go on the grid per se and use a lot of miniatures. Again, your miniature line, like I said, can be anything from simple paper counters to the full-fledged plastic and lead miniature, or not lead, you don't want to do lead nowadays, but metal miniatures by all the various companies out there. Again, you can go as far and as deep as your budget and whatever whatever you allow. You'll also need some dice. This game is primarily simple D20, so all you will need is D20s for this game. You'll also want to use some playing cards because this game comes with an event table which discusses events that are likely to occur during the scenario, such as new monsters coming up, traps being sprung, or occasionally reinforcements arriving. Another thing you might want to do is create something similar for yourself for your own scenarios if you're using a completely different system. This is one of the things I do to adapt my current gaming situation to add more flavor to the game. Of course, you'll need a place to play at the table, and you'll need something to represent terrain. And again, terrain can go as far as you want. Whether you just use cardboard boxes from, cereal boxes and grocery store purchases, or you go all out and actually buy some of the great terrain that you can find online at various online retailers, or if you just simply one of those crafty people who like to make their own terrain. Again, as far as this is concerned, your imagination and budget are your only limits. The next step you'll want to do is create your ranger. You'll be given a certain number of build points to build your ranger, and then you will use those build points to allocate to build up your attributes and skills. This is your ranger's basic stat line. Move represents how far you can move per turn. Fight is your ability to fight with melee weapons, and it's also your defense against missile attacks. Then you have a shoot score for missile attacks, your armor rating, a will score, and your health points. And then you may spend up to 3 of your build points to increase your stats, as described here. You will then use your build points to give your character heroic abilities and spells. Here you will see your heroic ability list. You can use each one of these heroic abilities once per encounter, per time you spend the build points to get it. So, for example, if you spent the build points to get Deadly Shot twice, you can use this skill twice per scenario. If you only bought, Deadly Shot and Blend into the Shadows, you can use these two abilities once during each scenario. And then here's a list of spells that your character can acquire. Once again, you can use each one of these spells once per scenario, per time you buy the actual spell. So, for example, if you bought Burning Light twice, you can use that twice per scenario. If you bought Burning Light and Enchanted Steel, you can use each one of these skills once per scenario. You will then use some of your build points to add to your skill list. Skills also will be coming in handy during the scenario. Sometimes you'll be asked to make a skill test of a certain type versus a target number. This uses the D20 rollover system. You will then also use some of your build points to buy recruitment points. Your ranger does not travel alone. Just like in Frostgrave, when you had your wizard, apprentice, and all of their soldiers that followed along, here in this game you will also have recruits that will follow you. Then you'll also go ahead and assign your character or characters, if you're playing, with the recruitment points and the recruits, weapons, armor, and equipment. There are some basic rules here for setting up your table, the turn order and the phases. If you've played Frostgrave, you're familiar with the terminology of the phrases, such as, in Frostgrave it was the wizard phase, apprentice phase, soldier phase, and creature phase. Here you have the ranger phase, the creature phase, the companion phase, and the event phase. The ranger phase is where your ranger will take its turn. The creature phase is where the creatures will take their turn. The companion phase is when your companions will take their turn. And then the event phase is typically when you will draw from that deck of playing cards to create an event that may occur during the combat. It goes over the basic rules of combat, movement, moving off the table, jumping, all the things you would expect in a tabletop miniatures war game. How to move your characters, how they attack, how they move through the environment, how combat works. If you're familiar with Frostgrave, then you know how combat works. For the basics of combat, let's just say Guy A versus Guy B. They will both roll their D20, add their appropriate modifiers. Whoever rolled the highest roll will win. And then at that point, you will take the winner's die roll with their modifiers, subtract the armor of the character they are attacking, basically Guy B, and whatever the difference is, that is how much damage the creature takes. Combat is really, really quick and easy to figure out. Just like Frostgrave, scattered across the battlefield, you will find treasure tokens. Treasure tokens is what you want to acquire because, well, that's what your character's out here to do, is acquire some treasure and use that money to build himself up, buying better equipment and such to continue on with their further adventures. This game also has a simple AI for controlling creatures. One thing you can use this game for, if you don't already have an AI for creatures in, say, whatever game you are playing solo, you can take this series of rules and adapt them to go along with the rules that you are playing with, to kind of give you an idea of how creatures will act in combat. As stated before, your ranger will not travel alone. He will have companions. And there is an optional rule here that if you have more than one player, how you will divvy up your companions amongst the rangers. Obviously, if you have more players, each player will have less companions with them, in addition to the ranger. Types of companions you can have include an arcanist, an archer, a barbarian, a conjurer, a guardsman, a hound, knights, man-at-arms, a raptor, basic recruit, rogue, savage, swordsman, templar, tracker. If you are familiar with Frostgrave, you will recognize those stats and how it works. The only difference between these stats here and what's in Frostgrave, for the most part, is merely they have a recruitment point value. So if you are playing Frostgrave, you can use this also as a guide for, say, if you wanted to play Frostgrave solo. Just use this, or you can still use the standard rules in Frostgrave, whichever suits your boat. After all, it's your role-playing game. Play it the way you want. And then here are the campaign rules. After you finish a scenario, you will check for injury and death, calculate experience and levels, roll your treasure, and then reorganize your companions accordingly. As opposed to Frostgrave, however, in this game, your companions do level up over time, just not as fast as the ranger does. And then here's a quick shot of the experience point chart and how you level up, how many experience points you need, and then what your ranger gets at each new level when they get to improve their skills, stats, gain recruitment points, or a new heroic ability or spell. And then here is the level up chart system for your companions. Again, you can take these type of rules and convert them over to your Frostgrave game if you want to have in your Frostgrave games your soldiers leveling up. You can adapt this to go along with your Frostgrave games. And what's a role-playing game without some magic items? They give you some magic items to play with, magic weapons, magic armors, uh, um, miscellaneous magic items, all that good stuff that if you're familiar with Frostgrave, well then there you go. You know what you got. And then it's got the missions. The missions are the actual scenarios. I believe there are like 8 in this book. I don't want to go over the missions because I don't want to spoil anything. But if you have this book and you necessarily don't want to play the game, but you'd like to adapt these missions to whatever game you are playing, that is one way you can use this to give your other role-playing game that you're playing a background, a mission, a purpose, more than just kicking down doors, killing the monsters, and taking the treasure. If you want to have some type of story behind it, you can adapt these missions to whatever game you are playing. And of course, you can't have a role-playing game without a bestiary, monsters to smash. There is a small plethora of monsters in here. Again, those who are familiar with Frostgrave will be familiar with these type of stats. The only difference between the monsters written here and what's in Frostgrave is that each one here is assigned an experience point value. The experience points, of course, are used to level up your ranger. And here's a quick screenshot of your character sheet. As you can see, it's quite simple. And then you also have another sheet for your companions. There is also a short campaign in here called The Burning Light, which of course you can use to play when you play a ranger game, Rangers of Shadow Deep, or once again, you can take this type of scenario or this type of campaign and adapt it to whatever role-playing system you are using. And that is a quick overview of Rangers of Shadow Deep. This is a pretty fun game. I've got several scenarios already done underneath my belt, but I've also adapted some of these missions to my other games that I play. Another thing, like I said, you might want to do is take parts of this game, and adapt it to whatever role-playing system you're using. I will make an event table for some of my scenarios taking the event space out of here and put them in the other role-playing systems that I'm playing to help create a story. I will use the investigation points. That's what I call them. But this game has little points of interest that you put on the map that every time your characters investigate, you roll on a chart and something will happen. Well, I take that same concept and add it to my other games. That way, I kind of have a little bit of a narrative story that comes from the charts without necessarily, being PC knowledge per se. I don't know if I explained that pretty well, but you can look through this book yourself and play the game. The game is very fun. And once again, you can take parts of this game and adapt it to whatever way you want to play your role-playing game solo. We'll put a link below for where you can purchase this game. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment. And if you like the video, please share it and subscribe. Thank you and happy gaming.